first political party in Uganda was formed in 1952, the Uganda National Congress. This party, by independence, would have developed into a national political movement, dominating the politics of Uganda like in other colonial countries like Tanganyika, but had fundamental weaknesses like lack of strong, united and inspiring leadership, with a clear vision for stable and prosperous Uganda. However, by independence, UNC had broken up and three major parties had developed in its places: DP, UPC and KY. The first president of UNC was Ignatius Museveni. There are several pitfalls to explain its crumble.
First of all, religion. That's why the disagreement between the Catholics and the Protestants inside that party, with each group breaking up, Catholics forming a Democratic Party and Protestants forming the Uganda People's Congress.
Despite of the breakdown based on religious, there was also the Buganda question, piloted by Baganda royalists within UNC. These overshadowed what would be the nationalistic agenda of UNC.
Within the Uganda National Congress, there were three main disagreements. One, the Catholics; second, the Protestants; but third, the Uganda royalists. So the formation of Kabaka Yeka was first and foremost to cater for the interest of Uganda.
During the constitutional changes, the UNC had become so unpopular that out of the 81 elected members in the National Assembly, UNC had only one representative.
They wanted really to form a national party that would be dominant, that would dominate Uganda's politics in the next 5 to 50 to probably decades. But what they did not know was that Uganda was quite a very different society. Uganda was an amalgamation of different communities together, different kingdoms together, but all these communities and all these kingdoms that you can explain had serious political interests.
The party members such as Apollo Milton Obote, B.K. Kuria, J.W. Kiwanuka and A.K. Mayanja, whose party later led Uganda to independence, drew their inspiration from Musazi's UNC.
Uganda is born again, free and independent.
Though the exit of UNC gave birth to a strong democratic party in 1954 under Matayo Mugwanya as first President General, it is said at its inception it was exclusively Roman Catholic in its inspiration and membership, against the Protestant hegemony in politics.
And you could argue that maybe was Britain having a hand in this disagreement that emerged between the Catholics and the Protestants within the post-independence Ugandan politics? Probably yes. But I would argue that you cannot rule that one out, especially given that some of these leaders were actually British educated.
The Democratic Party had a genuine grievance against discrimination. The Catholics alleged that they were being discriminated against appointments for public offices.
That was actually the main driving force that led to the formation of the Democratic Party. Now, the Democratic Party actually has maintained its, I would say, historical has roots. It still remains largely a Catholic party. And maybe with recently, I would say, and surprisingly, there is no much effort within the Democratic Party to avoid that.
However, outside Buganda, the general belief was that the Catholics cannot rule. This perception still lingers on the minds of many. However, President Museveni is gradually demystifying the belief in his all-inclusive working methodology.
We have had a Protestant head of state, I mean, for how many years now? Part of it is because you wonder why. Why is it difficult to have a Catholic as the head of state? But what probably President Museveni has realized is that I need to handle this question. That's why he has made his vice president for so many years. Most of his appointees as vice presidents have been Catholics, because he wants to balance this Protestant-Catholic question.
Whereas the Democratic Party and the Catholics played a significant role in fighting communism in the Uganda National Congress.
It has been on a downside decline. It has been declining over time. And right now I think they have like 9 members of parliament, and now they cannot produce a leader or maybe a presidential candidate that can attract votes from other regions of the country. That's why I'm saying, as a party, it needs to evaluate itself and think more towards creating a national outlook. The party should reflect the national outlook.
Despite its challenges, it will always be remembered for its belief in the rule of law and the concrete proposals for constitutionalism and independence.
The problem with the DP is a problem of continuity, like I've said to you. After its first leaders, the initial leaders who formed the party, although the party has remained, it has failed to attract real, genuine leaders who are with nationalistic outlook.
From the Uganda National Congress of Ignatius Musazi to the Democratic Party of Matayo Mugwanya and the pitfalls that led to their crumble, tonight I explore about the Progressive Party formed in 1955 by Eldad Mulira. Little is known about the Progressive Party. Like other pitfalls that characterize the crumble of UNC and DP, the PP was not exceptionary, and towards independence in 1962, it experienced a phase of leadership struggles which completely ran it down. By 1961, Mulira, the founding father, had already been replaced by Dr. Babumba.
In fact, at a later stage, it explains why majority of them collapsed. Even those that acquired power at independence could not survive. They collapsed over their own weight, because even UPC at independence was not run as a political party. That's why Obote had to arrest 5 of his ministers in a cabinet meeting, just because they expressed dissenting opinions.
Much as it was able to send its constitutional proposals to the Constitutional Commission towards independence, it was unable to send a representative neither to the Legislative Council nor to the London Constitutional Conference.
So you can't blame Progressive Party at the time for failing to have a representative in the Legislative Council here in Uganda and a representative in the Lancaster Conference. In fact, you had 3 important meetings leading to our independence. You had Mabra House 1 in 1960, you had Lancaster 1 in 61, and Lancaster 2 in 61 towards the end, that heralded our independence.
With that, the PP was no more. It collapsed on its own weight. Its exit from Uganda's political arena in the build-up to independence gave birth to Uganda People's Union between 1958 to 1959. It held a nationalistic image. Its leadership came from different social groups and regions of Uganda, unlike other parties which were largely Baganda-led and Baganda-based.
UNC, Uganda National Congress, Democratic Party, had battled the British for some time before joining those political parties, because they had participated in the politics from the 40s. But here you had a new entrant, and the British were much more comfortable in dealing with Milton Obote.
Like other political parties that were built on religious foundations and later contributed to their pitfalls, the religious factor too played in the formation of UPU, though its founders kept on denying the claim.
There are quite a number of undisputable facts that the Democratic Party was largely started by dissatisfied Catholics who felt that they were not being effectively represented by the existing political parties. That's a fact. The other comment about UPU is also a fact, because you see the major parties you had again were led by Baganda. So there were people from other regions whose view was, can we seize this opportunity?
While the Democratic Party was formed by Catholics to fight injustice, the Uganda People's Union was formed to contain Buganda's political hegemony and bridge the gap where the Baganda were really failing to facilitate the struggle for independence.
It was a problem then. It is also a problem today. But you have also got to appreciate that since independence, you've not had serious, meaningful, multi-party democracy. So you're talking about a framework that has not had the necessary experience.
However, its crumble was hinged on personalities of individual leaders, which they thought were key as much as their ideas.
So Obote was able to lead Uganda to independence because he lacked principles. For him, the end justified the means. Probably, if we had taken 1 or 2 more years discussing in Lancaster and gotten our independence in '64, probably the history of this country would have been different.
As a result, Uganda People's Congress, formed in 1960, exploited on the weaknesses and struck a deal for a merger with Uganda People's Union, and they consolidated party politics in Uganda. They represented a common program to the people for complete independence in 1962.
Within the Uganda National Congress, there were 3 main disagreements. 1, the Catholics; 2nd, the Protestants; but 3rd, the Uganda Royalists.
I do not subscribe to the view that if a party is based on religion or an ethnic group, then it can't flourish in a democracy. It is an outright lie peddled by the West to demonize anything not known to them.
Despite of these, there were other parties, but which did not have a significant impact. Some were made of one family, one person, a character that still plays on Uganda's political arena. A year to independence between 1961 to 1962. This was the year of achieving what all political parties were for, and this was capturing political power.
Me, I do not necessarily think that that was Uganda's biggest problem. I think what caused the major problem then was having political parties that had no serious ideology. Their focus was on attaining independence. So once the independence was attained, all hell broke loose.
This, at least, was to happen through constitutional means, and the route to that was through elections. Elections had to be won, but to win that election, you must have had majority votes. This required compromise, alliances, and some other craftiness.
The Lancaster Conference and the issues at hand were clearly laid down. Strategic interests for different entities. And the alliances were crafted based on those specific strategic interests. So one party was willing to meet them and compromise, another wasn't.
At this time, Buganda, and particularly the Mengo establishment, miscalculated by boycotting the 1961 elections to the Legislative Council. They even intimidated those who participated in it.
In '61, that was the arrangement, that KY had strategic interests. UPC had strategic interests. So they met halfway. The biggest problem was with Obote, who was not interested in enforcing the agreement, the alliance agreement. For him, his interest was in capturing power. Once he got power, then he disregarded whatever was agreed upon.
This notwithstanding, it gave birth to the Democratic Party with a majority vote, and they formed a government led by Benedicto Kiwanuka as a chief minister.
Democratic Party had, as a single party, had more members of parliament than any political party. So in any case, Benny Chiwanuka had more latitude to form government, but he chose not to.
However, it's important to note that these were elections conducted under the laws that Ugandans never participated in, to purge the Catholic protracted move to capture political power in the independent Uganda that was soon a movement by the Baganda leadership for purposes of defeating the Democratic Party. The Kabaka Yeka was shortly announced after the Constitutional Conference as a vehicle by which they were going to contest the Lukiko elections. This was a strange organization. It never had a manifesto because it hinged on Kabaka alone, Kabaka Yeka. According to this organization, whoever was not part of the Kabaka was deemed to be living a treasonable existence.
The fact of the matter is, Musas, despite having benefited from Western education, he hated the Western system with a passion. In fact, for your information, one of the reasons as to why he was not ordained, it was because of his criticism. He studied theology, but have you ever asked yourself why he was never ordained as a priest? Because he critiqued their systems right from the theological college where he was. So when he returned here, it was their mission to frustrate him.
They pushed all sorts of disinformation, such as that Kiwanuka was an anti-monarchism and threatening to overthrow the monarch and establish a republic. Between religion and tribes, the Mengo establishment opted for one of the evils, namely to shed the tribal lines and minimize the gains of the Catholic tribesmen representing a political opponent, the Democratic Party, to a Protestant Uganda People's Congress, though from without Buganda.
The same thing with Benedicto Chiwanuka, was very uncompromising in terms of his principles. In fact, even where he came from in central Uganda was never appreciated at the time. Ugandans never appreciated him at the time because he was a man of principles. He would not compromise on the values that he so much cherished. So the British knew that this was not the person to deal with. But an amateur, naturally, is one you can model into something that you want. Of course, at the end of the day, it failed. That's why the British were partly responsible for the first overthrow of Milton Obote.
Consequently, Kabaka Yeka in 1962 sent in 21 elected members, sent in by Lukiko, added to the 37 directly elected members of the Uganda People's Congress, which brought Uganda People's Congress to power, and Milton Obote as a leader to form government that led Uganda to independence.
Ben put his points on paper, and he said we need to reach an amicable solution. We need to reach an agreement. So Obote said, for me, I'm taking everything you're proposing. But in his heart of hearts, he knew that that was not the case.
This kind of politics evacuated into the Quebec Crisis of 1966.
But I do not know why you should ask me that question now. But the most interesting thing is that the pressmen seem to think that the Quebec has done nothing wrong. That it's only the government that has done wrong things.
And Obote's dictatorial suspension of the 1962 Constitution and declaring himself an executive president, and his 1969 move to the left, the Common Man's Charter, which was a replica of Tanzania's Arusha Declaration of 1967, which violated the right to property.
That Obote and UPC was not interested in that constitution. His interest was in acquiring power. So if I were in his shoes and I was interested in having a stable and prosperous Uganda, I would rather have postponed Uganda getting independence in 62 until we reach an agreeable position, not just to append my signature on a document just because I want to become head of state.
However, the contradiction that ensued from these religion-tribal-based party politics created conditions for a man like Idi Amin to emerge and overthrew Obote in 1971.
That when Obote sent Idi Amin to storm the palace in Mengo in 1966, he didn't know that he was teaching Idi Amin that politics and constitution are political expedients that can be gotten rid of to suit the president of the day. As day follows night, Amin used the very same script to overthrow Obote.
Amin inherited the same fundamental problems that Obote had confronted. To create popular support, Amin, the northerner, had to appease the southerners, and more especially the Baganda, who were at the core. He arranged that Mutesa's body be returned and be buried near his forebearers.